Well, hello, you amazing, beautiful people. Welcome back to another AniNews reaction video. So, AniNews has been doing a lot of content around solo leveling, but a lot of you have been asking me to check out more of the other videos. And recently, AniNews just dropped a ReZero Season 3 cut content video. Now, as a huge fan of ReZero, you should all know that I'm going to check this one out. A lot of you have asked me to react to other stuff as well. If you've got any more recommendations, put them down below. I'm actually super excited to see AniNews' breakdown, extra content and stuff that was missed from ReZero, like, just now, because I've never seen that before. So I'm gonna keep this intro nice and short. Please recommendations down below, like the video, subscribe for more, go subscribe to AniNews as well, and let's jump into my first reaction to ReZero Season 3's cut content.
I know I'm pretty late to filling you in on ReZero, but I actually think it might have worked out for the best. I'm still incredibly sorry to keep you waiting this long, but with the story now being segmented into each fight against the archbishops, rather than do cut content episode by episode, I can instead split them up by matchup. So, where normally we'd be jumping around from fight to fight, now we can simply focus on one of them. I'll be doing two episodes to cover the whole Regulus showdown, then one each for all the other archbishops after that. It'll be everything these incredible battles left out from the novel.
I will say, so far trying to understand which fight I love the most, I feel like I would lean towards Garth's fight. I feel like that fight, even though the Regulus fight is just incredible, something about Garth's fight really stands out.
This is the first half to Subaru's fight against Regulus. It's all the additional interactions, dialogue, and even fights, up to when he figures out what his powers are. The anime did a fantastic job adapting what they did, but there were several moments left out that added to the overall intensity and Subaru's struggle to survive. So, to start with when he just entered the church, there was a bit more back and forth between him and Regulus. Regulus would call it a shame the wedding was about to become a wake, while Subaru would question the confidence from a guy who just got turned down at the altar. What then caused Regulus to start using force wasn't Reinhardt's comment about him not being worthy, but rather Subaru's own comment insulting his persona. You see, for someone who's always calling himself complete and perfect, Subaru found it odd that Regulus was always comparing himself to those he described as defective. It was a flaw in his logic that Regulus didn't like being pointed out. Now, Regulus's threat here wasn't just a bluff that risked every wife currently present, they were words he truly believed regardless of how nonsensical they were. As insane as it was to think he wouldn't have been responsible for killing them, the way he spoke clearly indicated otherwise. At no point did Regulus think anyone other than Subaru and Reinhardt would be there.
Wait a second, someone told me that in this scene, if you look at this scene like close enough, you can actually see the girl smiling. So let me see if I can like rewind the shot to see if I can get the shot of the girl smiling. I'm just tapping the button now, that's why I'm just kind of talking. Because I've never actually seen that. If I find the shot, I'll press, flash it up on the screen. Oh yeah. You can, look at this. All right, check this out. So, as it gets closer, boom, close their eyes, start smiling. And it looks sad when
the way he spoke clearly indicated otherwise. At no point did Regulus think anyone other than Subaru and Reinhardt would be their murderers. It was an absurd notion of justice Regulus found zero lies in. It was when Amelia made the move which put herself into a worse situation that Reinhardt's obedience and Regulus' words respecting it would be some of the most logical things he's said ever. Aside from it being a commendable act of humility, the opportunity for diplomacy was what Regulus believed language had evolved for. To him, too many people tried to resolve things by force without first talking about it. So, for all the crazy things Regulus had said before, it seems there are a couple times when he does make a bit of sense.
Yeah, that is kind of curious, because Regulus most of the time just comes across like some fucking nut job who's obsessed with violence. But in that moment, he wasn't. And the way it's like been explained here sort of stands out that Regulus isn't. Like, he would rather choose dialogue first, which makes a lot of sense, actually, because that's kind of what he does anyway.
Although, in this case,
I mean, it usually
was
ends in death, but he doesn't start there.
Consider fair at all. Initially, said demand was to die by his hand, but considering how impolite it would be to ask him that, Regulus instead showed gratitude to Reinhardt and offered what we saw in the anime. Him dying then led to an interesting comment from Regulus, since it's kind of ironic for a guy who's practically immortal to talk about death.
No matter what kind of life we lead, death comes all too quickly. However great the achievements, however terrible the sins, death comes for us all equally. In this world where all sorts of inequality go unpunished, death is a kind and cruel equalizer. God damn, that quote is weirdly fucking on the nose,
being
man.
this cruel equalizer. Interestingly enough, though, it seems even Regulus knew death would eventually come for him too.
Oh.
It's for that reason that he described himself as someone satisfied with the smaller things, as a person who proclaims to not need much. Knowing the end was imminent was why he lived life continually seeking out joy. It was also that when that time finally came, he could say he was content. It was after reviving and attacking with Amelia's sword that the weapon would crumble away from the force of it. The fact it lasted long enough to create the impact it did, though, was an exceptional feat that spoke volumes to its creator. Not many weapons could withstand the power Reinhardt put into them. Now, for those wondering about Reinhardt's Blessing of the Phoenix, according to him, it allows him to revive from a single death. I'm assuming that means it can only be used once, but that doesn't mean he can't just manifest another blessing that does the exact same thing. I mean, we saw blessings come to him when he needed them, so I imagine Reinhardt can just ask for whatever now. Regulus returning from the...
Does that just mean Reinhardt is like the most OP character ever? Like, technically speaking, right? Because, like, he's like a... he's kind of like a... How do I word this without, like, pissing off fan bases? I'm thinking of ReZero in Slime, but if ReZero in Slime had every single kind of ability, like everything, yeah, that's what Reinhardt is. And a lot of people are gonna be like, no, I know. But what I'm trying to say is, as in, like, Reinhardt can just summon whatever the fuck he wants, do whatever he wants. He whatever he wants. Isn't he just, like, indestructible?
Rubble included yet another introduction and proclamation of how he was the most complete person, along with remarks regarding their disregard for him as a person. It was when hearing those iconic statements Greed was known for that Amelia would start to remember something. She couldn't help but feel that she'd met him somewhere. So, rather than just keep herself guessing, Amelia decided to ask Regulus straight to his face. It was a question to which he answered no. Regulus had no memory of ever coming across her before.
Oh, and he
to
answered
him, this
no.
was just her trying to trick him, and that led to a series of insults regarding her infidelity. As words Subaru couldn't stand to accept, he quickly flung his whip right at Regulus's face. Of course, it did no damage, but it did, however, stop his rant before he could insult Amelia more. It was right as Regulus was about to make Subaru pay for that's when Reinhardt would send him flying, bringing us now to the new battlefield that was the entire city of Pristella.
The entire city.
For Subaru and Amelia,
a nice battlefield that's still too small for these two guys.
This was a challenge of its own because Regulus's hold on their heart was unbreakable. An interesting interaction which highlighted exactly that was a certain chuckle Sylphie gave when Subaru suggested Reinhardt could beat Regulus. You see, unlike how Sylphie remained emotionless in the anime, in the novel she instead laughed at Subaru like he was a child spouting a fairy tale. To her and all the other wives next to her, Regulus's power was absolute. There wasn't anything Subaru could say that...
When they said the hold on the heart, like that the wives weren't going to act because of the hold on the heart, did they mean like the actual thing that we saw in the anime? Or do they mean like a metaphorical hold on their heart? Because they don't seem to have any love or care for him. So I'm guessing it's the physical
would
one,
change
right?
that. Now, with Reinhardt and Regulus essentially being the unstoppable force and the immovable object, you'd think their matchup would be a tie all the way through. This, however, wasn't the case, as there were constant shifts in momentum in which either side looked like they could win. So, first it was very easily Reinhardt, since with Regulus being an amateur who knew very little about the technical aspects of combat, keeping up with him was straight up impossible. There was no way for Regulus to effectively counter at all, so all he could do was toss his hands haphazardly in every direction.
See, that is something that wasn't fully explained in the anime that I really like, because the fight between Reinhardt and Regulus is just like that. Like, Regulus is just getting, like, thrown the fuck around everywhere, getting ragdolled. And I was like, why is he not fighting? He's just talking. And I guess that wasn't so much confidence, maybe it was a little bit, but it's also because he's not a fighter. I say this all the time. One of my pet peeves in, like, superhero movies and other stuff, or, like, any kind of form of media content, is when someone gets, like, powers or abilities, and then suddenly can fight. You see it all the time in every superhero movie ever. Someone gets powers, and then they can fight. And that's not how it works. If like, you took 100 random people in the room, gave them all superpowers, they can't all suddenly fight. Some of them will be able to fight better than others. And I feel like this is very well showcased in this fight. Reinhardt being a soldier, a warrior, knowing how to fight, and Regulus just being a guy, like not knowing standard combat.
For Subaru, who was watching all this happen, Reinhardt's speed made it look like he was
ReZero
in
actually did it
16
right
places
here.
at once. Neither him nor Regulus could keep up with what Reinhardt was doing. Even Reinhardt was well aware of this skill disparity himself, so when Regulus had asked out of shock what he was, not only did Reinhardt have time to state his position as Velt's knight, he was also able to advertise his hopes of garnering Regulus's support in the election. I'm sure this was just Reinhardt being Reinhardt, but from Regulus's perspective it was pretty BM. I mean, clearly he wasn't being taken seriously. What Reinhardt was able to learn from his various attacks here, though, was that...
I do kind of love Reinhardt being like, I trust you'll vote for us in the upcoming election, like mid-fight.
Regulus's invincibility differed from the way his blessings worked. It seemed the rules that applied to both their powers were very much different. So, it was as Regulus continued to get knocked around that he would heavily criticize the violence Reinhardt seemed to rely on so much. This enabled Regulus to call Reinhardt a villain, and that was an assessment Reinhardt couldn't necessarily disagree with. Perhaps this was Reinhardt just being modest, but for him there was some truth to it. He wasn't gonna shy away from the fact that his methods were essentially victory by overwhelming force.
I've just realized how nuts it is that he was able to draw the sword against Elsa. Like, I've just realized how crazy that is. When you really think about the fact that like, Garth was the one fighting Elsa. Like, I feel like Elsa is one of these characters you don't fully understand how strong they are. Like, just that statement alone is mind-blowing, you know? When you really think about it.
Talking to Regulus be like looking deep into a mirror at himself, and it was from that he now understood why Subaru advised not to listen to him. Such self-reflection was something Regulus couldn't care less for, though, so he quickly started mocking Subaru next. It was an unacceptable act Reinhardt couldn't stand for, leading him to drag Regulus's head across the pavement and plow the streets with it. He would then set him up for this beautifully artistic ice attack, a plan Subaru himself described as a cheese strat. It was after when Subaru thought the fight was over that he would start to feel guilty for teaming up on Regulus. Given how he had a new appreciation for life, Subaru honestly didn't like the idea of killing anymore. He knew all too well that only terrible things came from revenge. So, it was for that reason Subaru did feel remorse right now, but considering how archbishops were an unfathomable evil that couldn't be left alive, this to him was the exception. Now, I'm sure you deduced each of Subaru's plans was part of an
Bulls. Plan B was Plan Bulls. Plan V was Vitals. Bulls and Vitals. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I forgot about that, actually.
For all plan to figure out how Regulus's invulnerability worked, so the fact he came out of this without even being wet, well, that clearly indicated this wasn't some sort of enhanced defense ability. No, if anything, they knew now that this was something fundamentally different. Perhaps a power related to his ability to casually walk on water.
That's why they mentioned the water later on.
It's then that Reinhardt would grab his sword back from Subaru, but despite it still not budging from its sheath, Reinhardt's own opinion was different now. His assessment was that Regulus was dangerous. His only choice then was to swing his sword with the sheath on, highlighting a mindset that only the strong could afford. You see, it was only those who were truly powerful that never saw the need for subtlety or tricks. With overwhelming force always being the most successful, that was the only tool they ever needed to rely on. So, this would lead to an intense clash the anime left out, which is a bit unfortunate since it showed Regulus taking the fight a bit more seriously.
Okay.
Like, where before he was getting tossed around like a ragdoll, now every hit didn't even move him an inch. Despite each blow being strong enough to kill any other person hundreds of times over, there just didn't seem to be any sort of impact anymore.
So prior to this, Regulus was just like, I can't be killed, whatever. And then he's just getting thrown around because he's like, I can't be killed, what the fuck. But now at this point, he changed his mindset. He's actually trying. Instead of just letting this person punch him because he knows it's not going to hurt, he's now not really doing that.
The two had reached
They
yet
should have
another
left that in,
even
actually. That would have been
deadlock.
kind of cool to see.
This
But
was a tie
you
that
can't leave
didn't
everything
last
in.
for long, though, as during an incredible bout of close quarters combat, Reinhardt would get his leg literally exploded by an attack from Regulus. It wasn't from any of the projectiles Regulus had produced, though, but rather his own breath he turned into a weapon. A mere sigh had allowed Regulus to attack from a place Reinhardt least expected. That's what led him to get kicked away, removing him from the battle despite Amelia's best efforts to stop him. Though we didn't see it in the anime,
okay.
she had actually summoned several walls of ice to slow Reinhardt down, none of which worked as he would instead fly right through, leaving this unnatural human-shaped gap behind him. And that's a point we'll soon find out is very important. Regulus's ensuing argument with Amelia would result in a rant of straight-up misogyny, followed by
I already reckon I know what they're going to say about the human shape. Obviously, we know how Regulus's abilities work, so...
that crazy scene with the water cube. This led to their retreat down the waterway, which at first was using only their shoes, up until Subaru made the suggestion to create skates. It's not like this was something Amelia had practiced making before, but what she did practice was lots of image training with Subaru. Her ice brand arts was a technique Subaru taught her, and that practiced communication from it is what allowed her to make these skates. Amelia's counterattack while on them was a futile effort Regulus could only describe as pointless resistance.
Pointless
and
resistance.
When pointless resistance was done in the face of someone with overwhelming strength, well, that's what Regulus considered a denial of his right to be himself. To him, fighting back was them showing lack of consideration for their opponent. Regulus's chase...
Fighting back was showing lack of consideration for their opponent. Regulus has such a weird way of thinking, doesn't he? Like someone, he just like, he gets annoyed that someone doesn't want to die. Like that's him. Someone's like, he's about to kill someone and they're fighting back and he's like, but you can't beat me. Why are you fighting me? I am indestructible and amazing and you suck. This is a disgrace to my honor.
Would then continue far
you should
longer
just die.
than what we saw in the anime, since even after leveling out on even ground, Regulus would continue his pursuit while Subaru and Amelia would continue to run away.
That just walking on
How
the ice
did Amelia
is crazy.
and Subaru maintain the momentum while not sliding downward anymore? Well, that was due to an incredible display of finesse from Subaru's skills with the whip. You see, Amelia would have to create projectiles of ice, which would then serve as self-propelled rockets for Subaru to latch onto. As soon as the icicle they were attached to started to lose velocity, Amelia would make another one, then Subaru would latch onto that.
That's actually insane.
Altogether, it was a pretty difficult game of target switching, since not only did Subaru have to accurately land his whip while they were moving, there was also a very small window in which the switch was possible. Plus, with the added speed making it impossible for the lesser spirits to keep freezing the water, Subaru and Amelia were essentially water skiing now. Any mistake would send them headfirst into the canal. That being the case, Subaru could only pray to whatever greater power that would listen. He even sent some prayers to his master. It was...
Someone said to me that I should check out the witch tea party. Someone said I'd check out that video. Apparently, AniNews did a good video on that. And this whole scene, him like praying to the power and stuff like that, that immediately made me think of that. The ice skating scene was wild in the anime, by the way. It was one of these scenes that I thought was going to be really silly. And in a way it was, but it actually worked really well. It was silly, but very fitting to ReZero. I felt like it tied in the scene quite nicely. And it kind of matched how, like, Regulus's attitude. Because the whole fight, he's been silly. He hasn't, but also has. I don't know if that makes sense.
During this chase that an interesting observation was made, since it was whenever Amelia would try to disrupt Regulus with a massive barricade device that he would just glide through it like it wasn't even there. A human-shaped tunnel would form in whatever she dropped on him. This was a peculiar interaction that got Subaru thinking, cause when Reinhardt had gotten hit back here, the gaps that formed in Amelia's ice walls were human-shaped too. They didn't shatter like how they normally would had they been hit with something forceful. They kinda just made space in a way that was completely unnatural. So, whatever move Regulus used to send Reinhardt flying here is the same move he used now to make clear whatever was blocking him. It was an essential clue that helped Subaru to figure out Regulus's power later. One we unfortunately didn't get to see in the anime.
Okay.
Now, it was then that Reinhardt would make his return, revealing a healed leg and yet another reason for Regulus to yell at him. Once again, Reinhardt would be villainized for being more blessed than the average person, since clearly healing magic was his forte too. It made Regulus think Reinhardt was the type of person who crushed people's dreams just by existing. Regulus's assumption here was wrong though, since Reinhardt's leg healing was by no effort of his own. It was simply healed by the lesser spirits in the atmosphere that were worried for him. Reinhardt would then proceed with Plan O, combined with attempts at Plan A and S in the process. All had failed, but at the very least, Reinhardt was buying some time again.
I love how the plans are literally just, let's find weak points in his body. Until one of them works, you know, there must be a weak point in his body. Reinhardt is just, like, fucking insane. He actually is ridiculously strong. But why? Is it just him? Were the other sword masters before him this strong? Is it something to do with that? Like why is he so strong?
It gave Subaru a chance to consider everything he's seen so far. This led to the connection with the stars, which, just like the Japanese architecture here, all pointed to the existence of someone other than him who was pulled into this world. There was clear influence lingering from Subaru's old world. I won't get into the full train of thoughts Subaru used to unveil Regulus's power, but the nickname for his star in the Leo constellation was clue enough. Amelia's answer to what she felt here also confirmed Subaru's suspicions everything Regulus showed until now wasn't just mere invincibility. This then led to the question, was Regulus's heart beating, which was an answer Reinhardt actually had to sacrifice a lot to learn. Not only was he literally tossed into the moon, but Regulus's attack was so forceful it actually crushed his shoulder blade. It was the third time Reinhardt had taken damage now. With Reinhardt now gone though, Regulus was confident the fight was over. He was hoping Subaru and Amelia would show some sort of despair, but instead they seemed to be enjoying themselves. It was quite the shock considering the punishment they were about to face. Regulus would call them names trying to pressure them into seeing things his way, but Subaru would just clap back with insults of his own. He would make fun of his grey hair and empty head, all in an effort to extend their time with him. The reason he believed this was the best course of action was because through all his encounters with Regulus so far,
every time I see Betty just standing there, I immediately miss Betty, man. Betty has been like MIA for this entire thing. And yes, I get it. Every time I bring up Betty, people go, Betty's in a coma, Betty's not well, Betty's... I know these things, but I still miss Betty. You know why? Because Betty is best girl.
Subaru realized he couldn't win without patronizing and dominating his opponent first. So, for Subaru to stand there and act all confident, well, that made it so Regulus still had a long way to go. Like, the only reason Regulus went along with any of their gambits so far was because that was all part of showing them how futile their efforts were. Until they fully understood that nothing worked, Regulus would continue to let them try until they did. He needed to see them reach the darkest pits of despair. This was a weakness Subaru knew he could exploit for extra time, since Regulus's need to show how complete and perfect he was trumped the need to win as fast as possible.
So, Regulus looks at himself as the Titanic, you know? He's like, I'm unsinkable. No one can sink me. You can't sink me. And Subaru's just trying to look for an iceberg. It's that simple. But Regulus is so up his own ass. He believes that he is so unsinkable that he is willing to let Subaru and Amelia try anything they want just because in his eyes it is funny for them to try. You know, he's like, it's completely impossible. It cannot be done. Do your worst. That's why.
It's the reason we see him get so mad every time they fight back against him. They refused to acknowledge his dominance no matter how many times they
wants them to give up.
Amelia would then launch her attack, buying time for her to leave while Subaru could run away himself. Regulus couldn't help but be annoyed by the fleeing target in front of him, leading to a chase down where Subaru would have to use parkour to avoid getting caught. He would dodge his attacks as masterfully as he could, then climb 3 stories to a rooftop as agile as ever. Regulus may not have been able to get him there, but what he was able to do was knock that building over like it was nothing. Subaru would just jump to the next,
can't climb up, so
once again, Regulus would follow him and topple that one over too. It was a cycle of destruction that would repeat until Subaru found himself inside a building climbing a stairwell looking for a way out. Things looked relatively bleak, but after remembering the wise words of his parkour master, that message of survival reminded him of the attitude he needed to face in every situation. It was a self-taught discipline that supported his frail heart in the worst of situations. So, as tired as he was and as bleak as things looked, Subaru knew there had to be some way out. That's when the exact words he needed to say dawned on him, leading him to yell them out despite dodging through windows and avoiding rubble. It probably wasn't the safest thing to do, but it was certainly the best bet to make considering the situation he was in.
And the words
Subaru had analyzed Regulus's personality enough to know that this would be the one thing he'd respond to.
Oh,
sure
trying
enough,
to get a rise out of
Regulus's curiosity to know what it is Subaru knew led him to seize his destruction instantly. Subaru would then get himself to somewhere safe and explain the mentality which allowed him to get to this point. Put simply, Regulus is pretty much like Homelander. He craves for others' approval and needs to be the center of attention always. He constantly speaks of being...
I never thought of that, but he is a little bit, actually. That's kind of a good point. I never thought about that. Regulus does have a kind of a Homelander vibe.
Free of desire and brags of being perfectly fulfilled, but even with all that, he can't live without other people constantly affirming his worth. It's for that reason he projects his insecurities and values on everyone else. He needs to feel superior to them because he's narrow-minded and petty like that. He doesn't want to boast about winning because he's strong. He wants to force everyone to lose because he's afraid of himself. So the only satisfaction he gets is from that physical and verbal proof he's better than someone. To not break his opponent's spirit in its entirety, well, that just wasn't good enough to affirm his superiority. That's why when Subaru claimed he knew Regulus's powers, Regulus was so interested in hearing about it despite him being able to cut Subaru down right there and then. He had actually closed the gap to be right in front of him. Being at arm's length meant absolutely nothing though, because part of affirming superiority included entertaining Subaru's futile efforts. It meant hearing words that ultimately made no difference to him. That being the case, this then left—
The more you learn about Regulus, the more you completely understand every single scene we've like had him in so far, because he does just want to hear what everyone says. That's why whenever there's talking or dialogue or anything in any of these scenes, Regulus, who seems like a monster, always lets people finish. It's because at the end of the day, that's all that actually matters to him. It's not the fighting, because if they do fight, he's already won. So he could just take these people out, but the conversation is the only part of any interaction that matters, because he's already won a physical confrontation, so it's irrelevant to him.
Subaru with two options only. He could keep BSing and stall for time, or he could answer in increments, gauge Regulus's reaction, and go from there. The latter is what we saw in the anime, but the reason he didn't go with the former is because in the off chance he did say something completely wrong, Regulus would likely deem that an absolute victory and kill him because of it. So, it's then that Subaru would reveal the whole Lion's Heart thing, and that's a comprehensive topic we'll talk about in the next ReZero video. For now, I hope you enjoyed this one, along with all the details leading up to the climax of the fight. I'll try to get the rest of the fight done next week, but in the meantime feel free to check out the solo leveling videos, or the new merch if you want some high quality anime inspired streetwear.
There you go, new merch as well.
Until next time, ciao.
Ciao. I found it really funny at the beginning of this video, because there was one comment at the beginning of this video that just said like, where's ReZero? What was it? Where's ReZero? Let me see if I can find it. Let's see, there was one comment that made me laugh. I thought it was really good. It was like, where's ReZero? Something about solo. Where's ReZero? Solo leveling is so dog shit. It's so funny. It's so funny. I gotta say, as someone who is a huge fan, I got a big hole in my arm. As someone who is a huge fan of solo leveling and a huge fan of ReZero, they're both very different. I wouldn't compare the two. Very, very different series. Both very good. Okay. I feel like this cut content, if anything, has given me more of an understanding of Regulus, because I've made a million comments about why Regulus doesn't act a certain way. Like when I'm watching this series, I'm always surprised, and I think it's because I haven't really looked at Regulus as his own individual character as much as I've looked at Regulus as the big bad indestructible villain. You know, like more stereotypical than actually him, if that makes sense. So whenever I've watched ReZero and there's been scenes of Regulus and he hasn't just instantly killed people, it's always been surprising, because you would imagine the big bad indestructible villain would react like that, but he doesn't. That's always kind of thrown me off. But this, if anything, has really like fledged out exactly Regulus's like mindset. And it's kind of like what I said, every single confrontation he could get in, he's already won. He's so confident he's won that he just lets people punch him. You know, he's like, try and find a weakness, it doesn't exist. So when he has these like interactions with people, he doesn't care about the fight. It's irrelevant to him because he's already won. So he cares about the game. He cares about the lead up to that moment. As far as he's concerned, he's already pressed the switch that kills them. It's been pressed. So they're dead, and he's just toying with his food. So he lets them try over and over again to see if there's something wrong with him, because he knows there isn't. He knows there isn't. So by him doing this, he just gets to have fun in his eyes. He gets to like test them, push the boundaries, and he gets to break them, which is the most important thing to him. He already knows he could physically break them. He doesn't want to. He wants to mentally break them. So that's what he does. And like kind of understand that mindset makes every scene hit a little bit more differently. Because now like the wedding scene and letting people interrupt him and like talk him and stop fights, it makes sense, because to him, that is the fight, not the physical part. He's already won. It's everything else. So I do really like that. I like how this episode has sort of like highlighted that. I feel like AniNews did a really good job of it as well. And also kind of highlighting the fights too. It definitely made me realize how much bigger the fight is in the book, I would say. Like how much more happens, how bigger it is. And I'll always say, the anime adaptations of any kind of novels, you're never going to get a one-to-one adaptation. It's always going to be a little bit different. And that's simply because they've got time limits and they're trying to fit in what they can. So when it comes to fights, you're probably going to get stuff like that left out. And that's probably the best stuff to get left out, isn't it? You know, it depends what they're going to choose to prioritize. But yeah, it was actually kind of like curious knowing how much grander the fight actually was, how much more happened, and how much longer that went on for, and how much Regulus fought back, because Regulus didn't fight back that much at all in the anime. A little bit, but not really. But it sounds like Regulus actually did fight back a bit more, especially with the destroying of the buildings and chasing Subaru and everything like that, was a bit more aggressive in the novels. I'm curious to see the next part and the revealing of his abilities and the returning of Reinhard as well from the moon. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this reaction. Make sure you check out my weekly ReZero reactions over on the main channel, G.O.T Games. And as always, my friends, you will see me in the next video.